my next guest is talking all about Paris. He's written a book called City of Light, City of Shadows, Paris in the Belle Époque. It's by Mike Rapport, and I'm delighted to say that Mike joins us from the undying glamour, not of the left bank, but of somewhere in the middle of Scotland. Morning to you, Mike. How you doing?
Good morning, Giles. Thanks for having me, and thanks for that introduction. I'm sitting here on a balmy day in Stirling in central Scotland, so it's a bit of a contrast to Spain.
Yes, but
just as beautiful, I would argue.
If you close your eyes in the half light and order yourself a café au lait, you could almost be sitting there in some arrondissement somewhere. Tell us a little bit about the spark for this particular book, then, Michael, please.
Well, I've been teaching this period a lot. It's not my specialist area. I teach the French Revolution mostly, but I've been teaching this at both at University of Glasgow and previously at Stirling Uni for many, many years. And whenever I get to this period, the sparks fly. I mean, the seminars are just fantastic. And I thought, this is such a good, interesting period. There's so much going on. And there's so much that resonates today. Plus, of course, if you go to Paris, and I go to Paris a lot for my work, you see just the buildings associated with the Belle Époque, with this period around about 1900, everywhere. Even the metro, the metro entrances. You travel on the metro, and that was a Belle Époque invention, not innovation, rather, in Paris. I mean, the underground wasn't invented by Parisians of the Belle Époque, of course, but and I thought, this would be great to write something on this. And one day a senior colleague, asked me, what's your dream book? What do you want to write? And I thought, I would love to write a book about Paris and the Belle Époque. And this was about 4 years ago, I would say. And he just said, well, write it then. So I did. And sometimes you need permission. So you need somebody else to say, just do it. So I did.
Well, the thing with the Belle Époque, though, and they must drive you absolutely crazy, because until a certain well-known film about a venue there came into fruition, i.e. Moulin Rouge, most people didn't know. I mean, they might have had a glance at Toulouse-Lautrec and some absinthe drinkers, but apart from that, it was pretty much an area that is, if you like, misunderstood and absolutely glossed over, because it's not all can girls, is it? There's some really dark stuff happening at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think this is the period's allure. It is partly that it is, some of the glamour is true. I mean, it was glamorous. But there was also, as you say, a darker, much seamier side to it. You have political extremism. You have the origins, really, of the you can trace the origins of sort of modern 20th century, 21st century fascism, neo-fascism to this period. There's anti-Semitism. There is a grinding poverty. I mean, for all the glitz and glamour, which existed, mostly it existed for a relatively small proportion of Parisian and indeed French society. I would say Western society in general. For most people, and I would say about half of Parisians, so some of the statistics I've seen, life was a real grind of just trying to survive, of grifting an existence. It was a time when, for women, it was exciting, I guess, at one level, in that there was a kind of a growing feminist movement demanding women's rights. There's a very small suffrage movement, nowhere near as vibrant and as energetic or as kind of assertive, if you like, as it was in Britain or in Germany or in North America, but nonetheless, it was very vocal and very well organized. But on the other hand, women were very much second-class citizens. I mean, legally, in terms of civil law, as well as in terms of politics. So there's an awful lot going on. There's an awful lot that resonates today too. The kind of the mass media and the role of the mass media, that sort of stuff. It's fascinating. But
let's get the other one out, the other film out of the way, Les Mis, because you've got 1870, Franco-Prussian War. And this is going to happen again, but the Prussians come steaming through, deal with the French, take Paris, huge shock. We've got the Commune. It turns the whole thing on its head, and that sows the seeds for Paris being independent, and also these movements, because it's the old order. The Emperor Napoleon, the nephew, the son, the grandson gets booted off to Mexico, I think it is, but the whole of French society is turned on its head, and that lays the foundations for what comes in the Belle Époque.
Yeah, I mean, the Belle Époque is kind of hard to place chronologically, but, some people start it in 1870, 1871, as you say, with the fall of the Second Empire of Napoleon III, the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, spot on. And he gets captured by the Prussians at Sedan, Battle of Sedan, when the Prussians, he steamrolled through France, and was forced to capitulate to Otto von Bismarck. And that creates a revolution, actually, initially a bloodless revolution in 1870, the proclamation of the Third Republic. So French politics gets turned on its head, if you like. And then, but worse happens. Paris is besieged. Paris actually resists the Prussian and German invasion, and it's a bitter siege. I mean, people probably know a bit about what happened during the siege of Paris of 1870, 1871. Yeah, sort of Paris. The recipes for rat appeared in cookbooks and things like this, because people were getting very, very hungry indeed, on the verge of starvation. But then what happens is the government, obviously when you get a new republic, you have to have elections. Most of the vote went to rural population. France was a predominantly rural society of small peasant property owners, and they voted for monarchist or crypto-monarchist candidates. And there's a big fear amongst Parisians that, whoa, wait a minute, we've sort of, in some sense, saved the honor of France by resisting and starving, and the rest of France is capitulating and going back to monarchy. What is this? And they elected a left-wing, a kind of socialist government called the Commune, which resisted. There was a big kerfuffle with the national government over the possession of cannon on Montmartre, and that erupted into what you're talking about, which is the Paris Commune. Barricades go up. There's a lot of fighting. The Paris itself in 1871 was controlled for about 6 weeks by a socialist government. And it got crushed in a very bloody way. So it's a really bad start, traumatic start to the Belle Epoque.
But from that sort of springs this sort of intellectual movement, this architectural movement as well. Let's not forget the things that start going up around there. You mentioned the metro, brilliant design, and also because it's been through hell and back, first with the Prussians, then with the French as well. It's the fertile ground for writers, for artists, and for people who just want to have a good time, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. It starts slowly. I mean, in the initial reaction to the Commune and all that, there's this period of about 7 or 8 years. Remember, it's the regime of moral order, which is very conservative. I mean, even women's fashions become very, very conservative and very long skirts go all the way down to the ground and all that sort of thing. Where really they're trying very hard to keep a tight lid on the democratic implications of republicanism. They're swerving back towards the church and all those sorts of things. Hence the idea of moral order. The Sacré-Cœur began to be built in this environment as a monument of expiation to what they saw as the crimes of the revolution, and the godlessness of France. The disaster of 1870, 1871 happens because we turned away from God, and so Sacré-Cœur was a monument of repentance, effectively. But then it really takes off in the 1880s. I would say. I mean, this isn't to say that there isn't creativity. And the Impressionists go back to the 1860s, right? I mean, they're still there. So it's not to say that there was this was not, the 1860s, 1870s were not a kind of a cultural desert.
Barren wasteland,
yeah, exactly.
Throwing canvases on the barricades, yes.
Exactly. But there was a real exuberance to when the Republicans finally won elections in 1877, 1878. And there's this famous painting by Monet of the Rue Montorgueil, and there's another one of Rue Saint-Denis, which is celebrating 1879, the kind of day celebrating labor. Lots of tricolor flags going down the street. It's a very striking image, and it's also a celebration of republicanism, the final triumph of the republic. Things look like they might actually settle down for a while, and you get this burst of kind of investment in railways, for example, not new, but building on what has happened before under Napoleon III and under the previous regime before that, the July monarchy, and so on. And you can feel when you read about this stuff, and you look at the sources, you can feel this kind of, oh yeah, this is great. Also, censorship. 1881, censorship is virtually abolished. one of those liberal press laws, the law in July 1881. You still see it on buildings, actually, sort of law of July 1881, and 29th of July 1881, and it is just suddenly this flourish in the press as well. So you get this incredible flourishing of just not just high culture, but also of popular culture. But as well.
The thing is that popular culture and that censorship, it will come back and bite them in the dark way. I mean, think about Dreyfus case and the way that, and apologies to my French listeners, but you can say this is tapping into an anti-Semitism that's going for a while, and that will surface with bells on in Vichy France, for example, in the 40s.
Yeah, absolutely. I think most of your French listeners would agree with you that there was this kind of and the thing about what you're referring to, I think, is the Dreyfus affair in the 1890s, when an artillery captain called Alfred Dreyfus was accused, as it turned out, wrongfully of espionage for the Germans, handing secrets over to the Germans, and he was court-martialed, degraded in a horrible way, and then really humiliated, and then shipped off to a small rocky island off Devil's Island, the penal colony, which is off the coast of French Guiana in the Southern Caribbean. Southern Caribbean sounds great, but it was malarial, pestilential, bakingly hot. You were expected pretty much to die there. If you were sent there, you weren't meant to go back.
If you've read Papillon, this is the place, isn't it?
Absolutely. And during the revolution in the 1790s, it was referred to as the dry guillotine. If they didn't want to actually chop your head off, they sent you there, and they weren't expected to come back. And this is how bad it was. So Dreyfus was languishing there. Most people thought, oh, that's it. Thank God we've got the traitor. But then slowly but surely, evidence trickles out that the army have got the wrong man. And eventually the army itself and the government of the day, which is fairly moderate Republican government, got alarmed that the honor of the army was going to be impugned, the morale of the army is going to start being going to be damaged. And so they tell the new head of military intelligence, a guy called Georges Picquart, investigate and just shut it down. Make sure you find the evidence to shut this down for good. Picquart was himself anti-Semitic, has to be said, but he did his job properly. He did investigate, and he discovered that Dreyfus was innocent. The real culprit was another officer called Volsan Esterhazy. And it became very, very clear also that Dreyfus was convicted partly or was thought to be guilty because he was Jewish. Right? So all this stuff comes out, and Esterhazy is court-martialed in a whitewash. He is acquitted after half an hour deliberation by the judges, a bunch of armed officers, and that sparks this great big cause célèbre, the kind of popular outpouring of rage, if you like, when Émile Zola, the great French novelist, writes an article called J'accuse in Georges Clemenceau's newspaper L'Aurore in January 1898. And that sparks the control. That begins the Dreyfus affair properly, when it moves from beyond being the question of a guilt or innocence of one man to what is it meant to be French? Can you be Jewish and French? Zola and the people who supported Dreyfus and supported what they called truth and justice said, yeah, of course. To be French is to be, part of, the Republic, to adhere to its civic identity and so on and so forth, its laws. That's what it is. But the other side argued that to be French, you have to be sculpted by longer term traditions. You have to come out of the past, the history, soil, blood and soil, that kind of blood. And so the Dreyfus affair becomes a clash between two very different ideas of what the nation is, what nationalism is, and who can belong and who can't belong, and what is the nature of citizenship. And
the thing is as well that they are asking the big questions, perhaps in a way they haven't done before, because you can't ask yourself during the Terror what it means to be French. Otherwise, it means to be French will be having your head in the basket very quickly during the Terror. So therefore, if you question what everybody's saying, and these are this will be a timeline that goes through the philosophical existentialist question that France in particular and Belle becomes famous for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's these were, as you say, very, very big, very, very big questions, and it it had been growing out. These questions had been knocking around since the revolution. But I think the point you made is a very good one, is that actually when you look at the Dreyfus affair, there is violence. There are riots. There are riots, especially in France's Algerian colony, where there were a lot of kind of European Jews moving in, and the original kind of French European settlers didn't like them very much, and so there was this fighting between European Jews who settled in Algeria and other European settlers. That's what the worst of the violence was, and there is violence, but we're talking about primarily controversy, I think it's safe to say, which is fought out in print. Sure, in demonstrations on the street, in cartoons. I mean, some of the characters are absolutely savage, and some horrible anti-Semitic memes as well. And so, yeah, I mean, these are things, but ultimately, what France becomes famous for is this: every now and again, a crisis happens, and no matter how bitterly divided politics is, people come together in defense of nowadays of what people call Republican values, and so on and so forth. We saw that in the wake of the Charlie Hebdo attacks in 2015. And Dreyfus, you don't quite have that unity in the Dreyfus affair, and that was the problem. It's the First World War, which creates a very fragile unity, a fragile kind of sense. But the idea is the Dreyfusards, the people who supported Dreyfus, argued, look, we're standing up for the French Revolution, the values of the rights of man, those sorts of things. And you still sometimes hear this rhetoric today in points of crisis.
And also, it just like I said, mass media. I mean, people are getting out. There's education, because people can now read, which at least in Paris. I'm not saying in Provence or something like that, but the rural. So you've got that. You've got aeroplanes. I mean, you're thinking, we've gone past the Montgolfier brothers, so we've got the aeroplanes. We've got, we've got We've got, if you like, a Fien de Ciel feel-good factor as they hurtle into the 20th century.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was in many ways for innovation and science a really exciting time. To start off with, the first point you made was literacy. And first of all, the mass media. This is in many ways a golden age of mass media, but it also meant that it was a golden age of fake news, of what today we would call gaslighting, and this comes out in the Dreyfus affair, but also of mass literacy. Literacy rates in the countryside were, as you say, lower than those in the cities, but they were catching up pretty quickly. A document or a source I give my students to read when we talk about rural France is a kind of a semi-autobiographical novel by a French sharecropper called Émile Guillaumin, called Life of a Simple Man. And the life of the simple man of the narrator is somebody who actually is talking about change in how rural life changed in this period, around about 1900, 1904, when the book was published. And his nephew gets the benefit of free, compulsory, universal primary education, which was introduced by the Third Republic for boys and girls in the early 1880s. And what's fascinating is that the boy comes back with newspapers and starts to read them. And so the old fairy tales that the narrator tells about giants, about castles, about witches, princesses, and all that, the boy's not interested in them anymore. He's interested in what's happening in the world. Battles, not politics, but sports, these sorts of things. So that's a really important development, cultural shift. But yeah, the technology. The metros runs on electric engines. The first cross-channel flight by Louis Blériot in 1909, amazingly. When you think about how lightweight the plane must have been,
France
terrifying.
And also France and its relationship with the motor car, of course, at that point.
Yeah. The automobile, Le Dion Bouton, for example, Renault, I think, Peugeot, I think they all start from this period. The bicycle, there's the big democratizing way of traveling around, especially with the invention of the pneumatic tire, the actual rubber tire, which actually you can inflate and deflate by Dunlop, which I think is a Scottish invention in that sense. But actually, it's so stop people they become less bone shakery. But interestingly enough, the people who really welcome it are women, feminists. The Feminist Convention of 1897, I think it is, raised a toast to the bicycle because they saw it as a way of women getting around without having to be chaperoned. You can't be chaperoned on a bike, really.
Unless you're running alongside. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you've broken this down by looking at some major figures. There is so much it would have weighed in at something half the size of, I don't know, a tome of much magnitude. So you've broken it down by looking at perhaps Zola, who will know, but also sort of suffragettes, women's rights. So it gives a focal point, if you like, which is a brilliant thing to do, Michael.
Yeah, thanks. I've structured it in two ways. First of all, every chapter is focused around a building or buildings or a particular type of place. So the Eiffel Tower, the Basilica of the Sacré-Cœur, the boulevards, the metro, and so on and so forth, to kind of open up these wider themes. But the running thread, as you say, are these four characters. One is Émile Zola, because he's the great novelist of the period, and also his notes. Not just his novels, but his notes, which if you read French, you can download them yourself. And they're in manuscript, they're in his handwriting, but from the brilliant website of the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, the BNF. And they have this online library called Gallica. And it takes some finding, but you can find Émile Zola's notes. They've scanned them, and you can download them as a PDF in his manuscript. And his notes are amazing because he was meticulous because of the nature of his writing. So I found him a great source. He runs all the way through the book. Also, Marguerite Durand, as you say, the feminist who campaigned for women's rights, is a fascinating character, very glamorous in her day, and also founded a newspaper called La Fronde, which means a slingshot, but it also harks back to the first big French revolution, in a way, the Fronde of the mid-17th century, which was an aristocratic revolt against Louis the Regency in the age of Louis XIV. And she's an amazing woman. She argued that feminists can be glamorous, right? They can look good.
Yeah.
She quipped once that feminism owes quite a lot to my pretty blonde hair. Which not all feminists at the time agreed with him, or certainly not all feminists would agree.
And Michael,
subsequently
you just froze there.
Your image.
You just froze in mid thing there, Michael. So you were talking about pretty blonde hair. So let's just take it from the pretty blonde hair, because then your face got very contorted. Off you go.
Oh, sorry. That happens sometimes. I hate it when that happens. Happens to me all the time. Getting contorted. But no, she believed that you should use glamour to actually partly to answer the cause that all feminists are ugly.
And also, she must be a huge thing, because she's fighting not against machoism, but she's fighting against the French church, and we have this in Spain, church and state, and the church is absolutely ruling obviously the rural areas as well.
Yeah. I mean, in France, the influence of the church had been steadily rolled back, and there was a tug of war over the course of the 19th century, primarily over control over education, amongst other things. It's probably not as kind of as deeply bitter by that point as it becomes in Spain, and it breaks out again in the Spanish Civil War from 1936. But you get that similarly. But in 1905. After the Dreyfus affair, the Third Republic separated church and state, just said definitively the state won't support the church anymore. And that's the state of affairs we've had since then in France. My other two characters, just to say very briefly, are the Vietnamese diplomat Nguyen Trong Kiep.
Indochine, isn't it? Of course, you've got Indochine.
Indochine, yeah. And he's there representing, his monarch there to the Third Republic. And he writes a series of verses, as he says, praising the capital. And I wanted an outsider. I wanted somebody from France's colonies, empire, and their insight. What's interesting is reading in between the lines, and I'm not the first to make this point, when you read Nguyen Trong Hiep's verse, it's double-edged. He says some things, but then you think, well, wait a minute. That can be read one of two ways. And it could be because I was reading them in French translation. But he, so for example, he says things. The very last verse is he talks about laws, and he says the thing is that this is great. This is where laws are made, but don't forget that laws and human reason are the same for everybody. In other words, that the colonizing power, France, doesn't have a monopoly on wisdom and on good laws and all that sort of thing. Which there was a little dig there. He was a fascinating character. And the fourth character was probably my favorite, is Jean Jaurès. who I'm not a socialist myself, but he was a socialist politician. He's an historian. He wrote a multi-volume history of the French Revolution, so what's not to like? He was also incredibly humane. Strongly believed in democracy and republicanism. His wife was Catholic, and she kept going to mass throughout their marriage. And so his own idea of a second republic didn't stop him from, having a very, very happy marriage with a devout Catholic wife, with whom they had children. And he wrote a lot. He was involved in the Dreyfus affair, as Zola was, as Durand was, in fact. And so he provides fascinating insights in all this as well. So you have these four characters in this book.
Because there's everyday life is going on at the same time as these grand proclamations and these great. We sometimes tend to forget that they are, and that's why Zola's notes must be quite good if they're that meticulous, because it's the day-to-day minutiae that really bring it home.
Yeah, quite exactly. What people are wearing. I mean, one of my chapters starts in the Goutte d'Or district in the 18th arrondissement, which is where Zola set his novel L'Assommoir, the one which is the real breakthrough novel for him, which made him quite wealthy. Became a bestseller, controversial at the time, about alcoholism and the degeneration of Paris slums. The Goutte d'Or has changed quite a lot, but you can still see the topography. And his notes from that are fascinating because he talks about what people are wearing. And in fact, although in the novel it's depicted as this kind of place of grinding poverty and struggle, in his notes he talks about, people going around their business. It's very industrious as well. He describes people at their work, in shop windows, even in their doorsteps, getting on with stuff. And so it's a really mixed picture. Interesting, very vibrant picture he paints of the district.
What do you hope that people will take from City of Life, City of Shadows?
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
What do you hope that people will take from City of Light?
I hope, first of all, they just enjoy the book. Even if they don't go to Paris, not everybody can. I think everybody should, but not everybody can. But that's just me talking. I think it would be. So enjoy it. I think also, key thing is that things we worry about. Social media and its impact, fake news and its impact, gaslighting and its impact, divisive politics and what that does to a democracy, populism and those sorts of things. These things worry us now, but we've been there before. And this struck me as I was writing the book. And again, I'm not the first person to have said that the thing about the Belle Époque is that it is both different and familiar to our own age, from our own age, and to our own age. So it was the great historian Eugene Weber said, I think, something along those lines. So yeah, I think there's a lot to learn from the Belle Époque, how people managed it. Some people got kind of bogged down in the quagmire, but others found ways to try to rise above it. And tried really hard to kind of say, look, let's use our heads, let's use our reason, let's use our critical thinking, let's rise above it.
If people want to find you online, because I'm going to run out of time, where can people find you in the nicest possible way?
How can people find me?
Online, yeah.
Online, I'm on Twitter, or X as it's called. They can also find me on the University of Glasgow website. You do a staff search, and that's it.
You'll pop that knee deep, right? So the book is the pop up knee deep in the Belle Époque. The book is called City of Light, City of Shadows, Paris in the Belle Époque. It's by Mike Rapport. You can order it from our own virtual bookstore. Michael, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Giles. It was fun. Great speaking with you. Thank you.